The Wild West was a land of dust, danger, and endless stories of both cruelty and kindness. In one small frontier town, life was often unfair. Those with money and power controlled everything, while the poor and the helpless had to fight just to survive. It was in this rough and unforgiving place that a young boy found himself alone, with no family to stand by him and no home to call his own. He was only just stepping into manhood, yet the world had already treated him harshly. His parents had passed away during a winter sickness that spread quickly through the town, leaving him orphaned before he had a chance to grow strong. The people who once knew his family moved on with their lives, and the boy became just another forgotten soul wandering the dusty streets. Every day, he searched for work, hoping someone would give him a chance. He carried wood, cleaned stalls, and even begged at the saloon doors for leftover bread. His clothes were worn thin, and his face always carried a tired look far beyond his years. But what struck people most about him was his innocence. Despite his struggles, there was still a softness in his eyes, the mark of someone who had not yet been hardened by the cruelty around him. And it was this very innocence that drew the attention of the wrong kind of men. Whispers started to spread through town. Men who dealt in human misery saw the boy as an easy target. They spoke of him in the corners of saloons, laughing about how much they could make by selling him off like cattle. It was not unusual in that lawless land for the weak to be treated as property. For those men, money was more important than humanity. One late afternoon, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in red and orange, the boy was forced onto a wooden platform near the center of town. His wrists were tied loosely, not because he was dangerous, but simply to show he had no control over his own fate. A crowd gathered, curious and restless. Some people came to watch for entertainment, while others came with coins in their pockets ready to bid. The boy's heart pounded in his chest as he looked out at the sea of faces. He felt small, like a lamb trapped in a circle of wolves. He tried to stay strong, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. His lips were dry, and though he wanted to shout for help, no sound came out. He lowered his eyes, ashamed of the position he was in, wondering if his parents would have wept to see him treated this way. The auctioneer, a man with a thick mustache and a voice loud enough to shake the rafters, began to call out prices. He joked about the boy's youth and innocence as if it were nothing more than a quality to be sold. Men in the crowd laughed and tossed their coins high, each raising the bid higher. The sound of metal clinking against wood echoed sharply, burning into the boy's ears. Every bid made him feel less human, like he was nothing more than an object. He felt his legs weaken under him, and he fought back tears. But among the faces in the crowd was one woman who did not laugh, who did not see the boy as a commodity. Mary, a widow who had lived in that town for many years, stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. She was not wealthy, nor was she powerful. Life had taken much from her already. Years before, her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with only memories and a small cabin on the outskirts of town. People respected her for her honesty and her quiet strength, but she lived a lonely life, keeping mostly to herself. When Mary's eyes fell on the boy, she felt something shift deep within her. She remembered the nights she spent grieving, the emptiness of her home, and the ache of a heart that had no one left to care for. Seeing the boy standing there, vulnerable and frightened, tore at her soul. She thought of her own husband, of how he used to say that kindness was the only thing worth holding on to in such a cruel world. Mary could not turn away. She could not let this child's fate be decided by greedy men. The auctioneer continued shouting, his booming voice filling the air. $5. 10, 15. Who will give me 20? The crowd roared with excitement, some shouting crude jokes, others whistling. The boy stood frozen, each word striking him like a hammer. And then, just as the auctioneer called for the next bid, a clear, steady voice rang out above the noise. "I'll give you 25, Mary said. The crowd fell silent for a moment, stunned, heads turned in her direction, eyes narrowing in disbelief. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, then let out a chuckle. "Mary, you're bidding? You must be joking," he sneered. But Mary did not flinch. She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving the boy. "I mean it. 25, she repeated firmly, her voice carrying strength far beyond her small frame. She reached into her purse and held out coins, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Some laughed, others muttered in confusion. Why would a widow spend her savings on a boy with no family, no property, no worth? But Mary didn't care about their questions. She knew what she was doing. The boy was not worthless. He was a human being, and he deserved a chance at life, not a sentence to misery. The auctioneer hesitated, unsure whether to mock her or take her offer seriously. Finally, he smirked and shouted, "25 from the widow. Any higher?" He scanned the crowd, but the laughter had died down. Some men folded their arms, unwilling to challenge her openly. Others looked away, perhaps ashamed, perhaps fearful of what it would mean to fight her bid. Mary's heart raced, but she stood firm. She knew this was nearly all the money she had, the small savings she had kept for her own survival. Yet in that moment, her own future seemed less important than saving his. She thought of the long nights she had spent alone and how maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to give her life meaning again. The auctioneer raised his gavel and, with a slam against the wood, declared, "Sold." "To the widow for 25? The boy lifted his head in disbelief. He saw her standing there, her eyes soft yet strong, and for the first time in a long while hope flickered inside him. Mary stepped forward, untying his wrists herself. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You're safe now. Come with me." Together they walked away from the platform, leaving behind the noise, the stares, and the cruelty of the crowd. The boy's steps were unsteady, but each one carried him further from despair. For Mary, the decision was costly, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had risked everything, her money, her safety, even her reputation, but she knew in that moment that it was the right thing to do. And so, on that dusty evening in the Wild West, a desperate boy found his savior in a widow who refused to let cruelty win. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but as they disappeared down the quiet road leading to her cabin, one thing was certain: their lives were about to change forever. The night after Mary had taken the boy home was quiet, but not peaceful. She sat by the small fire in her cabin, staring at the flames, thinking about the choice she had made. She had given away almost all of her savings to save him. That money had been her safety net, her way of surviving the long winters and hard times in the Wild West. Now it was gone. But when she glanced at the boy, who sat on the wooden chair by the fire with his head bowed, she knew she had no regrets. The boy's face was still pale, and his eyes carried the same fear he had shown on the platform earlier that day. He didn't speak much, only whispered a few words when she gave him food. She had offered him bread, a small bowl of soup, and fresh water from the well. He ate slowly, as though he wasn't used to having someone care whether he ate or not. Mary noticed the way his hands shook each time he lifted the spoon. He tried to hide it, but she saw. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Mary said gently. "No one will hurt you here." The boy looked at her, his lips parting as if to answer, but then he dropped his gaze again and remained silent. Mary didn't press him. She knew trust was not built in a single night. She herself had spent years learning how to live again after her husband's death, and she understood how pain could silence a person's heart. As the firelight flickered across the walls, Mary thought about the stares from the crowd, the way people whispered when she shouted her bid. Some of them had laughed, others had looked shocked. She knew what they would say the next day. They would call her foolish, wasting her savings on a boy. Some might even spread rumors about why she did it. The town was small and people always had something to say. But Mary didn't care about their voices. What mattered to her was the boy's life and the chance to give him dignity. The following morning, the sun rose with golden light spilling across the dusty land. Mary woke early, as she always did, and stepped outside to tend to her small garden. When she came back in, she found the boy sitting on the floor near the fire, still looking uncertain. His eyes lifted when she entered, and this time he spoke. "Why did you do it?" His voice was soft, almost broken. Mary set down her basket and looked at him. She gave a small smile. "Because no one should be treated the way you were. Because I couldn't stand by and watch." He studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. When he found none, his shoulders eased just a little. "I don't have anything," he whispered. "Nothing to give back." Mary knelt down so she could look him in the eye. "I didn't buy you to get anything back. I brought you here because you deserve a life, not chains. You don't owe me anything. But if you want to stay, we'll figure things out together." Those words planted a seed in the boy's heart. He didn't know what to say, so he only nodded. For the first time, a small spark of hope lit within him. As days passed, the boy began to adjust to life at Mary's cabin. She taught him small tasks: how to fetch water from the well, how to feed the chickens, and how to chop wood safely. At first he fumbled, unused to being trusted with responsibility. But slowly his hands grew steadier and his confidence began to show. Mary praised him gently whenever he succeeded, and she never scolded harshly when he made mistakes. Instead, she reminded him that learning always takes time. One afternoon, as the boy carried a bucket of water, he asked her a question that had been on his mind. What if those men come back? Mary paused. She had thought about that herself. The men who had lost the auction were not known for their kindness. They might not accept their loss quietly. Still, she refused to let fear rule their lives. If they come, we'll face them, she answered firmly. You are not alone anymore. Remember that. Her words comforted him, though he still felt a knot of worry inside. Each time he heard voices in the distance or saw men ride past the cabin, his heart raced. But Mary's steady presence gave him strength. She reminded him of something he had never really known before, the feeling of being protected. In town, rumors spread quickly. Some people whispered that Mary had gone mad, wasting her life savings on a boy who had nothing. Others said she had done it out of pity, while a few admired her courage but kept silent for fear of being mocked themselves. The auctioneer told the story in the saloon, exaggerating it until it became almost like a legend.
Can you believe it?
He would say. The widow outbid us all for that boy? What's she thinking? Saving someone who was already lost? But not everyone in town felt scorn. Some secretly respected her bravery. They had seen the cruelty on the platform and knew they had done nothing to stop it. Mary had done what they were too afraid to do. Meanwhile, the boy began to grow stronger under Mary's care. He still carried sadness, but now it was mixed with determination. He wanted to prove himself worthy of the sacrifice she had made. When he worked in the garden, he pushed himself harder. When he fetched wood, he carried more than was needed. He wanted her to see that he was not a burden. And each time Mary looked at him with kindness, his heart grew lighter, but danger still lurked. One evening, as Mary and the boy returned from gathering herbs near the river, they passed by a group of men outside the saloon. The men stopped talking when they saw them. Their eyes followed the boy, cold and sharp, and one of them muttered something under his breath that made the boy stiffen. Mary tightened her grip on his arm and kept walking, her chin held high. She did not answer their stares, but inside she knew trouble was coming. That night, after the boy had fallen asleep, Mary sat by the window with a lantern. She thought of her late husband, of his strong hands and the way he used to protect her. She wished he was there to stand by her side. But then she reminded herself that she was not weak. She had made her choice and she would not run from it. The boy needed her and she would not fail him. The boy, though pretending to sleep, heard the faint sound of her sighs. He realized then that she had risked more than money. She had risked her safety, her peace, and perhaps even her life just to save him. A tear rolled down his cheek as he lay in bed, but it was not a tear of despair. It was gratitude, something he had not felt in a very long time. In the Wild West, people often said that life could change in a heartbeat. For the boy, his life had changed the moment Mary's voice had cut through the noise of the auction. For Mary, her quiet, lonely existence had been transformed the moment she placed her hand on his shoulder and walked him off that stage. Neither of them could predict what would come next, but both knew one thing clearly. They were no longer alone. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the boy began to feel a sense of belonging in Mary's cabin. At first he was restless, unsure if this safety would last, but each sunrise gave him proof that life could be different. The morning started with chores, simple ones like feeding the chickens or gathering water from the well. Though these tasks were ordinary, they filled him with a quiet pride because for once he was trusted to do something meaningful. Mary watched him carefully, never pushing too hard, always encouraging him when he faltered. The boy was not used to such kindness. He had grown up in a world where weakness was mocked and where survival often meant fighting for scraps. Yet here in this small cabin on the edge of town, he felt something new, the beginnings of peace. Mary treated him not as a servant or a burden, but as though he was her own flesh and blood. When she spoke to him, her voice carried warmth, and when she smiled, it reached her tired eyes. One afternoon, Mary found him sitting outside holding an old book. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. He confessed that he had never really learned to read well, as his family had been too poor for schooling. Mary took the book gently and sat beside him. "Then we'll learn together," she said. Each evening after supper, she lit a small lamp, and the two of them would sit at the wooden table. She would point to the words, sounding them out, and he would repeat after her. At first it was slow and awkward, but with time the boy's confidence grew. The act of learning gave him something he had never imagined, a glimpse of a future beyond labor and hardship. He could dream of more now. Perhaps being a writer, or at least someone who could understand letters and not be fooled by contracts or tricksters in town. Mary felt joy in teaching too, for it filled her nights with purpose. Still shadows lingered. The men who had lost the auction had not forgotten. They spoke bitterly in the saloon, calling Mary foolish and the boy worthless. Some threatened that one day they would take back what they believed was theirs. The boy overheard whispers when he went into town, and though he said nothing, fear clung to him like a heavy coat. He often lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering when those men might come. Mary sensed his unease. One night she found him outside, sitting near the fence, staring at the moon. "You're thinking too much," she said softly. He turned to her with worried eyes. "They'll come back for me," he whispered. Mary walked over, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Maybe they will try. But you are not alone anymore. If they come, we face them together." Her words, steady and calm, gave him comfort, though the fear never fully left. Yet little by little, the boy began to believe her. He started to carry himself taller, to look people in the eye when he walked through town. Though he was young, he was learning that dignity came not from riches or strength, but from the belief that one's life had worth. As weeks passed, the boy became more involved in Mary's daily life. He fixed fences, chopped wood, and carried baskets from the garden. The cabin began to feel less like her home alone and more like theirs together. The silence that once filled the small rooms was replaced by the sound of shared laughter and conversation. Mary, who had once thought she would spend the rest of her life in loneliness, began to feel alive again. But the peace they found did not go unnoticed. One evening, as they returned from town with flour and salt, they saw a group of men leaning against the saloon wall. The men's eyes followed them, their faces twisted with resentment. One of them spat on the ground and muttered, "Not for long." The boy's steps faltered, but Mary gripped his arm, steadying him. They kept walking, heads held high, though both of them knew the danger was real. Back at the cabin, Mary closed the door and bolted it. She lit the fire and turned to the boy. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "Those men may talk, but words are not stronger than truth. You are not theirs. You belong to no one but yourself. Never forget that." The boy nodded, though inside his heart raced. He wanted to believe her fully, but fear still crept in. Yet he could see how calm she remained, how her eyes burned with determination, and he found strength in her courage. Over time, the bond between them deepened. He began to see her not only as his protector, but as a mother. One morning, as they worked side by side in the garden, he stopped suddenly and looked at her. "Do you think of me as your son?" he asked nervously. Mary put down her basket and smiled, her eyes glistening. "I already do," she said. The boy's heart swelled with emotion, for in that moment, the emptiness inside him was filled with something he had never truly known: family. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about all the moments that had led him here, the auction, the fear, the cruelty of strangers. And then he thought about Mary's voice cutting through the noise, about her hand on his shoulder, and about the warmth of her cabin. He realized that his life had been saved not only from physical danger, but from despair. He was beginning to live again, not just survive, but the threats were never far. Rumors spread that the men were planning something, that they would not let Mary's defiance go unanswered. The boy overheard two men in town speaking about a lesson they would teach the widow. His blood turned cold, but he did not tell Mary right away. He feared worrying her, though deep down he knew she likely already suspected. Mary, however, refused to live in fear. She went about her days as normal, her head held high. She reminded the boy that fear feeds the cruel, and that courage, even when it trembles, is what stops them. She taught him that standing tall, even when afraid, was its own form of strength. The boy carried her words in his heart. He knew the danger was real, yet he also knew that Mary had given him something no one could take away: dignity, love, and hope. He vowed silently that he would not let her down, that he would protect the life she had risked everything to give him. In the Wild West, survival was often measured in bullets and gold, but in Mary's cabin, survival meant something deeper. It meant holding on to humanity in a world that tried to strip it away. Together, The widow and the boy found that family could be chosen, not just born, and that love could grow even in the harshest soil. And though the storm of trouble was drawing closer, for now they held on to each other, knowing that their bond was stronger than the shadows waiting outside. The quiet days at Mary's cabin soon gave way to tension that could no longer be ignored. Rumors in town had grown louder, whispers that the men who once tried to buy the boy were plotting their revenge. People spoke about it in hushed voices in the saloon, in the general store, and even along the church steps on Sunday mornings. Some pitied Mary, others secretly admired her courage, but most kept their distance, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Mary heard the whispers, of course, and though her face remained calm, inside she knew danger was drawing near. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, Mary and the boy were in the barn, stacking hay and preparing for the night. The boy worked eagerly, wanting to prove his strength, but Mary noticed the way his eyes darted nervously whenever he heard distant voices or the sound of hooves on the dirt road. She tried to ease his worry with small conversation, but even she could feel the air growing heavy. Just as they were finishing their work, the sharp sound of boots crunching on gravel reached their ears. Mary froze, her hand tightening on the lantern she was holding. The boy's face paled as shadows appeared near the edge of the property. A group of men stepped forward, carrying torches that flickered in the evening air. Their eyes glowed with malice, and their laughter echoed coldly across the land. "Well, well," one of them sneered, the widow and her pet boy. "Thought you could outbid us forever." Another man spat on the ground and raised his torch higher. "Time you learned you can't stand against us." The boy's heart pounded so loud he could hear it in his ears. He wanted to run, but his legs felt frozen. Mary, however, stood tall. She placed the lantern down and moved in front of the boy, shielding him with her body. Her voice, though steady, carried fire. "This boy is mine now and under my protection. You will not touch him." The men laughed, mocking her bravery. "Yours? You think one woman can stop us?" one said with a sneer. Another took a step forward, swinging his torch menacingly. The boy clutched Mary's arm, terrified, but she gently squeezed his hand. "Stand behind me," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the mob. The men jeered louder, but suddenly, from across the road, another lantern flickered. Then another, and another. The neighbors had noticed the trouble brewing. One by one, townsfolk began to step out of their homes. A blacksmith carrying a heavy hammer stood on one side. A shopkeeper with his sons came forward holding lanterns. Even the preacher walked up slowly, his Bible in one hand, his eyes firm. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered, forming a silent wall behind Mary. The men holding the torches shifted uncomfortably. They had expected to frighten Mary easily, to take the boy without resistance. But now they faced not just a widow, but an entire community standing with her. The blacksmith spoke first, his deep voice carrying weight. "You've gone too far. This isn't your business anymore. Leave them be." The mob hesitated. They had strength in cruelty, but not when they were outnumbered. Still, one of them snarled and tried to push forward. Mary didn't flinch. She raised her chin and declared, "This boy is free. He belongs to no man, and I will give my life before I let you take him." Her words rang out with such force that even the boy, trembling behind her, felt a surge of courage. He had never seen anyone fight for him like this. Never imagined someone would stand in front of danger just to keep him safe. In that moment, Mary wasn't just a widow. She was his shield, his protector, his family. The standoff stretched for long minutes, the night air thick with silence broken only by the crackle of torches. Finally, one of the men cursed under his breath. He looked around at the growing crowd, at the firm faces staring back, and realized they could not win this fight. With a bitter growl, he tossed his torch to the dirt. "This isn't over," he muttered. "You'll regret crossing us." One by one, the rest of the men lowered their torches and backed away, their pride wounded. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the smell of smoke and the echo of their threats. The neighbors did not move until the last of them was gone. Then slowly, the blacksmith turned to Mary. "You're a brave woman," he said quietly, "and tonight you reminded us all what courage looks like." The townsfolk lingered for a while, offering nods of respect before returning to their homes. The boy, still trembling, clung to Mary's arm. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "They were going to take me," he whispered. "But you didn't let them." Mary knelt down so she could look him in the eye. "I promised you were safe here. she said softly. "And I intend to keep that promise no matter what it costs me." Tears filled the boy's eyes, but this time they were not only tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of a deep realization that he was no longer alone in this world. For years he had carried nothing but despair, but tonight he learned what it meant to have someone fight for him. Back inside the cabin, Mary bolted the door and set the lantern on the table. The boy sat quietly, still shaken, while she poured him a cup of warm tea. She spoke gently, trying to calm him. "Fear is natural," she told him. "But remember, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing firm even when fear tries to shake you." He listened closely, her words sinking deep into his heart. "I'll be brave too," he whispered.
For you?
"For us?" Mary smiled, placing her hand on his. "That's all I ask." The night outside was still heavy, and though the danger had passed for now, Mary knew it was not over. The men's threats still lingered, like storm clouds waiting to return. But something had changed that evening. The neighbors had shown their loyalty, and the boy had seen that kindness and unity could overpower cruelty. Later, when the boy lay down to sleep, he stared at the ceiling with new thoughts swirling in his mind. For the first time, he believed he had a future worth fighting for. He thought of Mary's courage, the neighbors' support, and the way the mob had backed down. He felt proud not only of her but of himself for standing through the fear. Mary, sitting by the fire, thought of her husband. She whispered a quiet prayer, thanking him for the lessons of kindness he had left behind. She felt his spirit with her, proud of what she had done. And though her body was tired, her heart was strong. The Wild West was a place where cruelty often went unchallenged. But tonight, Mary had proven that compassion could be stronger than greed, and that one act of courage could awaken the bravery in many. The boy she had saved now knew that he was not just a survivor. He was loved, valued, and protected. And as the fire crackled softly, both widow and boy knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The night of the confrontation passed, but its memory stayed with both Mary and the boy. The air around town felt different in the days that followed. People who once whispered about Mary with doubt or suspicion now looked at her with respect. Some even tipped their hats when she walked by, while others offered small gestures of kindness like leaving extra food at her door or offering her a hand with firewood. Though the town had its flaws, her bravery had awakened something in the hearts of many, a reminder that compassion was stronger than greed. For the boy, life began to bloom like a spring flower after a long, harsh winter. The nightmares of being sold and treated like an object did not vanish overnight, but they faded slowly with each day he spent under Mary's roof. He woke each morning to the smell of bread baking or the sound of birds chirping outside the cabin. He worked alongside Mary, tending the garden, feeding the chickens, and carrying water. What once had been survival was now life, steady, warm, and meaningful. One afternoon, while repairing the fence, the boy paused and looked across the wide-open land. His chest filled with something unfamiliar but powerful. Hope. He thought about how far he had come, from trembling on a wooden platform to standing proudly on the soil he now called home. Mary noticed the quiet smile on his face and asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I was just wondering," he said softly, "what my parents would think if they could see me now." Mary placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "They would be proud," she said with certainty. "And they would thank God that you kept going until you found safety." The boy swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Deep inside, he knew she was right. In the evenings, they continued their lessons by lamplight. Mary taught him to read and write, patient and steady as ever. The boy's progress was slow but remarkable. One night, he managed to read an entire page on his own. When he finished, he looked at Mary with shining eyes. "I did it," he whispered. Mary clapped her hands with delight, her laughter filling the small cabin. "Yes, you did. And that's just the beginning." The boy felt taller, stronger, and more alive than ever before. Learning gave him a sense of freedom that no one could take away. He dreamed of one day teaching others, of showing children like himself that they too could rise above hardship. The town began to change too. Inspired by Mary's act of courage, a few families decided to open their doors to other orphans or children in need. Slowly, the idea spread that even in a world as rough as the Wild West, humanity could survive if people stood together. Mary's single act of defiance had lit a flame that reached beyond her cabin. But Mary herself was changed most of all. For years she had lived in loneliness, her heart heavy with the loss of her husband. She had believed her life story was already written, one of grief and quiet endurance. Yet saving the boy had given her life new meaning. She no longer saw herself only as a widow, but as a mother, a teacher, and a protector. She had traded her last savings, but what she received in return was priceless: love, purpose, and family. The boy, too, felt transformed. He was no longer the boy on the platform, but a young man growing into strength and dignity. He walked into town with his head held high, no longer afraid of whispers or cruel laughter. When the same auctioneer who once tried to sell him passed by, the boy did not lower his gaze. Instead, he looked straight ahead, proud of who he was and where he belonged. The threats from the cruel men eventually faded. After their failed attempt to scare Mary, they lost their influence. The townsfolk had seen their weakness and cruelty, and fewer people wanted to be associated with them. Slowly, they drifted into the background, their voices silenced by the courage of a widow who had dared to stand tall. One warm summer evening, Mary and the boy sat outside the cabin, watching the stars appear one by one. The boy leaned back, his voice quiet but sure. "When I stood on that platform, I thought my life was over. I thought no one would care if I disappeared. But then you came." He turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved me. You gave me a home. I don't know how to thank you." Mary smiled, her eyes soft. "You already have," she said. "By living. By smiling again. By letting me be part of your life. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of love. "Then I promise you," he said firmly, "I'll make this life worth every sacrifice you made. I'll be strong. I'll be kind. I'll be everything you believed I could be." Mary reached over and held his hand. "That's all I ask," she whispered. From then on, their days were marked by growth and joy. The boy grew into a young man with skills, knowledge, and confidence. He helped neighbors, offered his strength when others needed it, and slowly became known as someone people could rely on. Though his past had been filled with pain, his future now carried promise. And Mary, though her hair grew silver with the passing years, never again felt the loneliness that once haunted her. She had found family where she least expected it. She had risked everything on a single act of compassion, and in return she gained a son. Their story spread far beyond the town. Travelers who passed through often heard the tale of the widow who saved a boy from being sold, and how her courage had changed not only his life but the heart of the entire community. It became a quiet legend of the Wild West, told around fires and in saloons, a reminder that even in a land known for its cruelty, kindness could still shine. As time passed, the boy kept his promise. He studied hard, worked harder, and grew into a man of dignity and honor. He never forgot the platform where his life could have ended, nor the voice that saved him. Every decision he made, every step he took, carried the weight of gratitude and the memory of Mary's sacrifice. Mary, too, felt peace. She often sat on the porch in the evenings watching him return from town or from the fields, and her heart swelled with pride. She knew that when her time came, she would leave the world not in sorrow but in fulfillment, for she had taken a risk, given all she had, and found that love multiplies when shared. The boy and the widow, two lost souls brought together by fate, proved that family is not only about blood, but about love, choice, and sacrifice. Their bond was unbreakable, their story unforgettable. In the end, they showed that even in the harshest of times, humanity could prevail, and that one act of courage could change the course of not just one life, but many. And so, the Wild West remembered them not for wealth, not for power, but for something far greater, the simple truth that kindness saves.